Before we go any further, if you care about serious, source-driven survival history and the kinds of details most documentaries skip, subscribe to this channel now. This is a legacy archive for people who actually study how humans stayed alive under pressure, not entertainment fluff. Share it with someone who understands why these details matter. What most people never grasp about World War II survival is that hunger was often more dangerous than bullets. Fire meant smoke, smell, light, and detection. On multiple fronts, soldiers were ordered not to light fires for days or weeks at a time. Yet men still ate, still maintained strength, and still survived. These weren't improvisations born of luck. They were deliberate field-tested methods passed quietly between units. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you straight into those methods and explain how they worked, why they worked, and how the same logic still applies today. Why fireless cooking became a battlefield necessity rather than a convenience. From the Eastern Front forests to the Pacific Islands, any open flame risked artillery fire or airstrikes. German patrols hunting partisans watched for smoke columns. Japanese jungle units learned that fire smell travelled farther than sound. Allied reconnaissance teams behind enemy lines carried strict no-flame orders. This forced soldiers to rethink food itself. Cooking was no longer about heat. It became about chemistry, time, pressure, and biological breakdown. How cold-soaking rations turned inedible calories into usable fuel. One of the most common fireless techniques was cold soaking. Hardtack, dried grains, rice, beans, even dehydrated vegetables could be softened and partially digested using nothing but water and thyme. Soldiers would place rations in canteens, mess tins, or even helmets lined with cloth, then let them soak for hours or overnight. The key was patience. Cold soaking didn't make food pleasant, but it made it chewable and digestible. US troops soaking K rations, Soviet soldiers softening millet, and German units rehydrating ersatz bread all relied on the same principle. Today, this applies directly to survival planning. Any dry food you store becomes edible without fire, if water and time are available. The trick is breaking it down slowly rather than forcing consumption dry. How acidic foods were used to chemically cook meat and fish. In several theatres, especially the Pacific, soldiers used acidity as a substitute for heat. Vinegar tablets, citrus powder, fermented fruit juices, and even weak alcohol were used to denature proteins in raw fish and thin-cut meat. This wasn't guesswork. Many soldiers had prior experience with pickling or curing back home. Thin slices were soaked long enough to reduce bacterial risk and improve digestibility. This method mirrors modern ceviche principles, but was used strictly for survival. Practically speaking, acidity doesn't sterilize food, but it lowers risk and slows spoilage. For modern application, understanding how acids affect protein structure allows safer consumption when fire is impossible. How fermentation quietly replaced cooking in prolonged hiding situations. Partisan fighters and encircled units relied heavily on fermentation. Vegetables buried in cloth sacks would sour within days. Milk turned into yogurt-like substances. Grains soaked long enough began to ferment naturally. Fermentation pre-digests food, increases nutrient availability, and suppresses dangerous bacteria. Soviet resistance units documented using fermented beet mash and cabbage as primary calorie sources. This wasn't accidental spoilage, it was controlled decay. For today's survivalist, fermentation remains one of the most powerful low-energy food processing tools available, requiring only containers and basic hygiene. How body heat was used as a slow but reliable cooking source. This method sounds crude, but it was effective. Soldiers tucked wrapped food portions inside clothing layers, under armpits, or against the abdomen while marching. Over several hours, fats softened, starches hydrated, and frozen items thawed completely. German winter units used this to soften bread bricks. Allied troops thawed frozen ration bars this way in Arctic conditions. Body heat doesn't cook, but it transforms food from harmful to manageable. The lesson here is understanding thresholds. You don't always need full cooking temperatures to make food usable. How pulverizing food replaced heat as a digestive shortcut. Another overlooked trick was mechanical breakdown. Soldiers crushed dried foods into powders using rifle butts, stones, or mess kits. Powdered food absorbs water instantly and requires minimal digestion. Some units mix these powders with water to create calorie slurries that could be swallowed quickly. This conserved energy and reduced exposure time. In modern terms, this is exactly why emergency ration powders exist. Heat was replaced with physics. How fats were consumed raw to maintain energy without cooking. Fats were prized because they required no cooking and provided immediate calories. Lard, butter, marrow, and preserved animal fat were eaten raw, despite taste. Eastern Front diaries repeatedly mention raw fat consumption during winter retreats. Fat doesn't carry the same bacterial risks as protein-heavy meat and delivers dense energy. The survival principle here is clear. When fire is unavailable, prioritize foods that don't need transformation to fuel the body. How time itself became the final cooking tool. Above all, WWII soldiers learned to let time do the work. Soaking, fermenting, softening, and breaking down food wasn't rushed. This mindset saved lives. Fireless survival is never about speed. It's about allowing biological and chemical processes to replace flame. That lesson remains unchanged today. These weren't clever tricks pulled from manuals. They were learned the hard way under threat of death. Understanding them connects us directly to how real people endured real conditions without modern safety nets. If this kind of deep practical history matters to you, subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who studies survival seriously, and help preserve these lessons before they're forgotten again.